November 11th, 1994, the Baltimore Sun wrote an article about the homicide rate in Baltimore City. It said Baltimore's homicide rate, which had slowed earlier in the year after the record-setting pace of the prior 2 years, has soared with 46 murders in the past 41 days, mostly from drug-blighted neighborhoods in the Eastern District. For the year, city homicides continue to lag, but the city's most murderous year ever with 353 killings. 25 years ago, on November 11, 1994, Baltimore had had a fifth consecutive year of 300-plus murders. City leaders lamented the tragedy that was unfolding. They pledged to do better. But nothing really changed, and for the next 5 years, there were 300-plus murders again. Sirens blared, buildings remained blighted, drugs were sold, and violence continued unabated. These are too often the sights and sounds of Baltimore City, but it doesn't have to be that way. In 1994, 25 years ago, as I left Baltimore to go to Yale for college and Harvard for law school, before I would return to be a federal prosecutor and a city prosecutor and deputy attorney general of Maryland, Baltimore was among the most murderous cities in the country. And here we are, a generation later, with so little having changed. City politicians having tried 1 year after another, promising to make things better, pledging to do something different, and finding year after year that nothing has changed. My name is Thiru, and I'm running to be mayor because enough is enough. The bloodshed must end, and it requires not just an aspirational vision, but a tactical plan to get there. Today, with the support of community leaders and faith leaders, victims of violence, the mothers of murdered children, people in law enforcement, and ordinary citizens who call this neighborhood home, we unveil the End the Bloodshed plan. This unrivaled, unprecedented plan, which I will review in just a few minutes, does not only all of the things we agree upon, focusing on trauma and addiction, investing in our children, addressing and focusing on violent repeat offenders, reforming our juvenile justice system, treating gun violence like the public health crisis that it represents. But it goes beyond that. Our plan contains no less than 20 significant programs and initiatives that have never been done in Baltimore before. They are how we pledge to bring murders below 200 once again. It wasn't that long ago when I was a city prosecutor here in Baltimore, where I prosecuted a gang and killers in this very neighborhood when murders were believed to be out of control, and yet we brought them to 197 murders. It was just a few years ago when strategies and collaborations and partnerships were working. We know we can do it because we've done it before. Today, what I'm going to do is have a few of the people behind me speak. They're going to explain why this crisis of crime is so personal, so urgent, why they believe that city leaders have failed us, and why we can do better. And I'm going to return to the podium to talk a little bit more about the details of this program and to answer some questions. With that, let me turn it over to some of the people that have suffered the unspeakable tragedy of losing their children to gun violence in this city. Some of them lost sons to this city many years ago, but it feels like yesterday. And some of them have lost sons to this city in what is meaningfully yesterday. But all of them share a bond that too many in Baltimore share. They have suffered the unspeakable tragedy of having to bury their children. But they are here today to find purpose in pain, to find some body of hope, not in platitudes and promises, but in plans, in details, in concrete ideas, and leadership that can get it done. With that, let me ask a few of the mothers of murdered children to step up.
Good morning. My name is Velma Marshall. My son was killed in gun violence in 1999, 20 years ago. And the sad part about it is his killer was convicted and tried, but the state saw fit to dismiss all charges against him. So now he's back on the street as if he's never done a thing. Now he's trying to sue the city for wrongful imprisonment, knowing that he's a killer. Something has to be done as far as these people killing our kids and leaving us in pain. It's been 20 years, but I still hurt every day. That was my only son, with no grandchildren to carry his name. Thank you.
Thank you.
My husband and I lost our only son, Alex. It will be 2 years ago this Thursday. He was murdered on his way home from the Royal Farm store in our area. My husband, Alex, and Thiru's dad taught at Frederick Douglass High School in Baltimore City many years ago. Something has got to be done about the violence, the murders, the crime in Baltimore City. There is no one better than Thiru that I can think of or support for mayor of this wonderful city that we love. It is a hurt when you lose a child that is unbearable. You never get over it. Your lives are devastated. And because of our faith and the support of our friends and family, we are trying to live with it, but it's something you will never get over. And this has got to stop. Something has got to be done. So we support Thiru for mayor of this city that we love. Thank you.
Good morning. I just listened to Thiru say there were 20 important implementations that has never been introduced to Baltimore City. It is a must. The change must happen. Enough is enough. I lost my son June 8, 2014 to a carjacked in Baltimore City. Crime still hasn't been solved. So when you talk about change and implementation of policies that have never been introduced, I want to see change. So I'm here for Thiru, but here for the whole city and the moms that have lost their children too. The pain never stops. Grieving has no expiration date. So they don't know what they stamp us with. I wake up with it and I go to bed with it. I pray every day for strength, because without that, I couldn't do it. I was suicidal. I was homicidal. They have no idea of the marks that they left. And it's quite easy to know that they don't care, because there was no connection between the killer and my son. So it was easy to kill and walk away. I want to see a change, not just for me, but for the city, and not for another mother to walk away or wake up with the pain that I deal with every single day, every day. So a plan that needs to take place, I want to see it take place through.
It's a beautiful Victorious Day, family. My name is Victory Swift. My son's name is Victoria Swift. He was murdered March 26, 2017. He was number 774 for 2017 on the homicide list. Victorious was not murdered because someone was trying to feed their addiction. Victorious was murdered because Baltimore City does not give a damn about black children. And I say that because over the last 10 years, there's been over 8,000 homicides or attempted homicides in this city alone. See, we can say we care, but we can't care when we continue to allow the behavior of homicide and violence to ravage our city, and all we do is provide memorials and apologies for the families. Someone says that we want to reduce it down to numbers. Tell that to any mother whose child has been murdered, stolen from them forever, that makes sense, because it doesn't. It does not make sense, and it never will. If we're not a city of change, then we are a city of complacency, and that is not only dangerous, it is evil, and it is destructive. This man has a plan to transform this city, to save lives, to build communities, to provide a communal mindset and collective formula that will help us heal, help us grow, and most of all, save our children, because there are children that are going to die.
Yes, Lord.
They're going to die this week.
My Lord.
There are children that are going to die this year, for the rest of this year, which is not much time. And at the end of the year, the only thing Baltimore City has to offer those parents is we are sorry. And the one thing they are correct at is they are sorry. Thank you.
It means so much to have mothers who have suffered unspeakable tragedy find some purpose in their pain, to come together with faith and hope that this city will see better days ahead. Part of our plan to change things forever in Baltimore requires leadership. But of course, a mayor cannot do it alone. One cornerstone of our plan is to establish a deputy mayor for public safety, a principal who will not only serve as a partner to the police commissioner, to bring and coordinate the resources of City Hall to bear on the neighborhoods that are most ravaged by violence, but also a signal to the community that there is no problem or challenge more significant, more daunting, more important than violent crime in Baltimore City. The deputy mayor for public safety will be a cabinet-level appointment, a direct report to the mayor, who will have all of the authority and vestiges of City Hall to go and do what is necessary to make sure that violent crime is part of our past, not part of our present. This is an awesome responsibility. And part of the responsibility of a leader is to bring other great leaders together. One of the people that is here today is the kind of person that I would want to name to be deputy mayor for public safety. Retired Chief Jim Johnson was police chief in Baltimore County for a decade, over the course of a distinguished career where he rose from cadet to commissioner to police chief. He investigated cases himself. He led divisions. He led one of the largest police forces in the country. And he presided over a period where there was a 24% reduction in violent crime. He recruited more women and minorities to the police force. He trained them with 22nd century approaches to community policing, to implicit bias, to de-escalation strategies. He has testified before Congress. He's been recognized by President Obama for his stewardship as a police commissioner in this country. He is the kind of person Baltimore would be lucky to have in an important role like deputy mayor for public safety. He's had a chance to review the key features of this plan to end the bloodshed. And it is my great honor to call him a friend and to call him up to the podium to share a few remarks.
Well, thank you, Thiru, and good morning. Thiru's vision of crime reduction and ensuring the safety of this community is critical to the success and frankly, safety of all of us in the city and, frankly, the metro area. Innovative use of technology, innovative use of other public safety resources, enhancing the work that has currently been done and will continue as we go into the future with consent decree. I strongly believe that Thiru's vision for this city and his plan for public safety will drastically reduce violent crime. Many of these same strategies were deployed in the county, and we were very successful, having 15 homicides in 1 year. Many of you may recall that we reduced homicide back to 1970s lows for a significant period of time. I strongly believe that Thiru's vision for this community will make us all safer. Thank you.
Before I go through some of the additional details, I want to call up Damon Walker. Damon is a friend. He is a supporter. He is also one of the lucky ones, a victim of gun violence who survived to tell the story, a victim of the streets of Baltimore who turned his life into something full of purpose, full of hope. And if it's okay, I'm just going to ask Damon to share a few words.
Okay, my name is Damon Walker. I work with the University of Maryland Shock Trauma Violence Prevention Program. And so basically what we do is talk to young men and young women who come into the hospital, victims of violence, a lot of times gun violence, and just try to convince them not to come back. And it's crazy that you see guys 2, 3, 4 times, you know. Some guys don't, most of them don't make it to the 4th time, but you know, it's just something that's pretty tragic. And you see, you know, a lot of people are very hopeless and really don't know what to do, and so they kind of just, they're on this turnstile of depression, and it all leads to nowhere. And you know, you know, the fathers go through it, the children are destined to go through it, and the cycle has to stop some type of way. And we see, you know, what the leadership has done to this community over the last 20 years. Baltimore has not gotten better as far as I've known. The school system, the neighborhoods, everything's gone downhill. So it's definitely time to move in a different direction, and I believe Thiru is that direction to go.
Can you share what happened?
Okay, well, I was a victim of gun violence back in January 1st, 1996. Just somebody randomly shot me, leaving a popular nightclub called Hammerjacks, and but you know, I was lucky because somebody randomly saw me laying in the street and picked me up and took me to shock trauma, and that's why I'm pretty much dedicated to changing the city and helping other people that's gone through what I've gone through.
Why are we here? Why are we here at this place at this time? Because 25 years ago, on November 11th, 1994, people in Baltimore were reading a story in the Baltimore Sun about how 300 murders was once more on the horizon. They hoped and they prayed that it wouldn't happen that year, but it did. It was, just as it is today, the 5th year in a row that there had been 300 plus murders in Baltimore City. Why are we here? Why are we here on this day in this place? Because I'm running for mayor to try to explain how important elections are, how important these decisions are. Because in 1994, Miss Velma's son was still alive. In 1994, Damon Walker had not been confined to a wheelchair. In 1994, we believed that 300 murders was an anomaly that would go away, but it didn't. It didn't change like the weather. 1 year after the next, 1995, 1996, 1997, 1998, we saw 300 plus murders again and again and again, because we believed that if we just prayed and hoped and relied on city politicians with their recycled policies, that one day, for one reason or another, things would change. But they don't change because we hope and pray. They change because we change. They change because we come together around an aspiration and a vision. We come together and believe that our city can be better than its darkest days. Why are we here in this place? 24th and Barclay is 1 block to my left. 24th and Greenmount is 1 block to my right. Back in November of 2013, this same month, 6 years ago, I was chief of major investigations and led a first-of-its-kind gang investigation and prosecution of the black guerrilla family that had terrorized this neighborhood for years. In a 5-block radius or so around 24th and Barclay, there had been 52 homicides and shootings. A murderer shooting every month for 5 years. In a neighborhood where kids play at the park, where children go to the rec centers, where families walk and raise their children in the homes behind all of you and in front of me. One case, one investigation, one strategy made a difference. That same radius that had had 52 homicides and shootings in the 5 years preceding a November day in 2013 went 18 months without a single murder, not one. There was a moment of peace in this neighborhood because decisions matter. Strategies and tactics and plans matter. Politicians are not supposed to just talk. They are supposed to lead. They are supposed to innovate. They are supposed to come up with solutions and ideas that can make tomorrow a little bit better than yesterday.
Yes, sir. Yep.
In this particular case, a gang had destroyed this neighborhood, one of the most profitable drug territories in all of Baltimore because of its proximity to the jail. This was contested drug territory, and one rival group after another would try to grab control from the black guerrilla family. But the BGF, a ruthless gang that has dominated this city for too long, never let it happen. I prosecuted an executioner of the black guerrilla family who killed a rival in cold blood at 1 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon on Greenmount Avenue, a north-south artery cutting through the heart of our case, heart of this city. While his blood was still drying, the executioner for the gang would return to the park a block to my right and celebrate and be celebrated by his fellow gang members. It was the camera right above us that caught that celebration. Cops and prosecutors worked together to build a case that had never been brought before. And for 18 months, this community that had been ravaged by gun violence and gangs had a moment of peace, a moment to breathe, a moment to rebuild. And rebuild it did, just a little. The Greenmount Rec Center appeared with this beautiful mural capturing all that is inspiring about Baltimore. But progress in Baltimore is too often 2 steps forward, 4 steps back. For the past 5 years, not just this neighborhood, but neighborhoods all across Baltimore have seen unprecedented levels of gun violence. We have the worst murder rate in America. We have the worst murder rate in Baltimore history. And yet we sit here and believe that if we just cross our fingers and hope and pray that maybe next year will be different than last. If we do not learn from history, they tell us we are destined to repeat it. 25 years ago, we hoped and prayed that things would change, but nothing did. And in the next 5 years, my friend Damon Walker would be shot. In the next 5 years, my friend Miss Velma's son would be killed. In the next 5 years, 1,500 people would die on the streets of Baltimore in the same way that 1,500 people had died in the 5 years prior. Enough is enough. This plan is called End the Bloodshed because it is time to end the bloodshed. In our plan, we agree with so much of what others have said. There is no question we have to focus on violent repeat offenders. There's no question we have to invest in our schools and in our children, in youth initiatives and in jobs. There's no question we have to rebuild the police department's information systems. We need better strategies to address trauma and addiction and mental health. We have to reconceive violent crime and gang and gun violence in Baltimore as a public health crisis, to understand the root causes and to go at them. We all agree that we have to reform the criminal justice system. We have to dismantle systemic and institutional racism. We have to strengthen families. And we have to expand the proven programs like ROCA and Safe Streets, like YouthWorks and LEAD. On this, every candidate running for mayor, every police commissioner that's put out a plan agrees. The question is, if we all agree about that and nothing changes, then perhaps more is needed. Perhaps something different is needed. The End the Bloodshed plan accounts for the difficulties of prosecuting police in Baltimore. It accounts for the difficulties of prosecuting criminals in Baltimore. How do we achieve the pledge that I have set out to bring murders below 200 when we are down hundreds of police officers? When we know that juries are skeptical of cops, when we're under a consent decree, when the number of detectives compared to the number of homicides shrinks instead of grows. How do we achieve this goal of reducing murders below 200 when we're down hundreds of officers, with detectives that are overworked, with juries that are skeptical? We need to make better, fewer, smarter cases. And that begins with a series of strategies. I'm going to very quickly go over several of them. First, for the first time in Baltimore, we will conduct 12 simultaneous wiretaps in the city's deadliest neighborhoods, which account for 26% of the murders 1 year after the next. We will not do them one at a time. We will not do them because there's been a surge. We will do them in anticipation of the surge of violence each summer. We will bring those wiretaps at the same time, and we will coordinate the arrests of 150 to 250 gang members and killers in the weeks before the killing months of May, June, July, and August. Every year we know it happens. Every year we lament it and we write stories about it and we cry and complain about it. And then at the end of the summer, we turn to action, when in fact we should have turned to action over the winter in anticipation of that summer of death. For the first time, the mayor of Baltimore will ask the U.S. Attorney of Maryland to subject to automatic federal review every carjacking, every commercial and bank robbery, every felon in possession case that takes place in Baltimore City for the summer of my first year in office. These are cases over which there is automatic federal jurisdiction already. For the first time, we will get off the ground with public hearings and with restrictions the aerial surveillance program that was grounded just a few years ago. No one can defend what was done when it went up without public notice, without public hearings, without public input. But this is a tool that could make a difference in the fight against crime. And in a moment so dire, when the people of Baltimore desperately want it, our city leaders need to lead. As mayor, that plane goes up in my first year in office. For the first time, Baltimore will expand the ground network of cameras by offering a $100 rebate to every residential and commercial property that purchases and registers a cloud-based camera with the police department. For the first time, we're going to clear the backlog of rape kits and burglary crime scene evidence. Last summer, the Baltimore Sun reported that dozens of burglary detectives were reassigned to patrol because we were down hundreds of patrol officers. we don't investigate burglary cases in Baltimore City in any meaningful way. And the forensics lab has literally hundreds and now thousands of untested burglary crime scene evidence that is sitting in a lab dormant. The problem is that there is no category of forensic evidence that yields better results than DNA and fingerprints from burglary crime scenes. 40%, it is estimated, of DNA and fingerprints collected from burglary crime scenes hits off the federal database. We're going to clear that backlog, and we're going to identify the burglars that are also committing carjackings and shootings and homicides. We may not arrest them and get them off the street for the carjacking where there were no witnesses, but we can arrest them and prosecute them for the burglary where there's no statute of limitations and their DNA or fingerprint was left at someone else's home. For the first time, Baltimore City Hall will launch a cold case initiative, the Never Forgotten Initiative, which will re-examine and keep open promising murder cases that either are one witness or one break away from prosecution or have the hallmarks of being committed by a serial killer. In the last few years, we have learned that Baltimore has the highest lethality index in America. That in most American cities, even the deadliest ones, 1 in 5, 1 in 6 shootings ends in death. But in Baltimore, it's closer to 1 in 3. There's a reason for that. It's because our killers use bigger bullets, more bullets, and they finish their victims off with headshots. Last year, the percentage of headshots in Baltimore was nearly 60%. This cold case unit will focus on and prioritize murder cases involving high caliber weaponry, 10 or more casings at the crime scene, and headshots. Because if you're using 40 caliber weapons, high capacity magazines, and finishing your victims off with headshots, you're not a first time offender. This is something you have done over and over again. And we're going to catch you and prevent you from doing the next one. For the first time, we're going to have an anonymized monitoring system of juvenile cases. Part of the frustration of the public is to see repeat juvenile offenders commit serious violent felonies over and over again and not even know what happened with the cases. Because they are juveniles, we cannot and must protect their confidentiality. But the public is entitled to know the fate of their case. And that we will establish at City Hall. For the first time, we will maintain in City Hall a non-public list of repeat violent juvenile offenders and develop customized strategies for 16 and 17-year-olds that are committing shootings and carjackings and murders as though there is no consequence. For the first time, as I mentioned before, we will create the office of the Deputy Mayor of Public Safety. This is a person who has the experience and record and leadership to manage one of the top priorities for City Hall. A person who can partner with law enforcement and help bring to bear the resources that City Hall must marshal, connecting housing and economic development, transit, and potholes to focus on the fundamental challenge of crime. For the first time, Baltimore will form an office of the public advocate, an equally important role filled by a civil rights leader with a record of community activism who will work with the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety to make sure the public's concerns are being heard. For the first time, we will dedicate $10 million to a diversion program that will take low-level offenders and, as a condition of their probation, offer them an apprenticeship program and a job. And at the end of completing that apprenticeship program and maintaining stable employment, their case will be dropped and expunged. We will create a parallel program. We'll create a parallel program called the School to Success Pipeline to replace the School to Prison Pipeline that will pledge to youth offenders that qualify an opportunity to avoid a finding of delinquency if they enter after school hours and on weekends an apprenticeship program and a job that will give them a better path than the path that they are on. I had the privilege of announcing and unveiling this program with the support of none other than Ravens linebacker Matthew Judon just a couple weeks ago. This is part of what we must do in Baltimore City too. For the first time, because we are down hundreds of officers, Baltimore will pursue a recruiting strategy that will do to policing in Baltimore what Teach for America did for teaching in this country. We will launch a college cadet program so that we can recruit 100 graduating seniors from the local colleges, particularly the HBCUs like Morgan State, where my mom taught, and Coppin State, so that we can get rising seniors who love this city, who call this city home, to come back and serve and be the face of policing in the 22nd century, to be trained on implicit bias and community policing and de-escalation strategies, to do the kinds of things that Chief Johnson did in Baltimore County. For the first time, we will push to lift the arbitrary eligibility requirements that prevent other qualified applicants from becoming police officers in Baltimore City. If you're looking for younger, more diverse, more local police officers, then you shouldn't have a restriction in a city that doesn't arrest people for marijuana that you can't have smoked marijuana in the past 3 years. You shouldn't have a restriction that permanent residents with green cards can serve in the United States Army, but they can't serve in the Baltimore Police Department. These are irrational obstacles that we're going to lift so that we can get the best and the brightest to serve in this critical role in this critical time in Baltimore City. For the first time, we will redeploy the school resource officers in our schools to do patrols in the neighborhoods around those schools, because right now, when we're down hundreds of officers, we need police officers on the streets, not fueling the school-to-prison pipeline in our schools. For the first time, we will free up detectives to do detective work again. Carjacking detectives, burglary and robbery detectives, shooting and homicide detectives, instead of working overtime shifts and doing overtime patrol in business districts and for city events, which can be achieved just as well by partnering with private security. And for the first time, we will institute automatic audits of police officers collecting more than $10,000 in overtime. The 8 GTTF officers who committed one of the worst policing scandals in American history collected nearly $1.8 million in overtime over the course of their conspiracy. There were early warning signs, because before you learn how to plant a gun or forge a statement of probable cause, you learn how to commit overtime fraud. There were warning signs in the overtime records of those 8 officers as their overtime soared from a few $1,000s a year to $10, $20, $50, $80,000 of overtime a year. Some of these officers are working very hard for that overtime. Some of these officers are going to work very hard on the wiretap cases that we're going to do in the 12 deadliest neighborhoods. But we're going to make sure that we hold our officers accountable just as we would hold any other public employee accountable. For the first time, we're going to take seriously reconceiving violent crime as a public health crisis by publishing an annual audit of public health indicators that drive violence, so that we know that all of the agencies know what needs to be done. And for the first time, we're going to open up CompStat to the press and to the public once a month. We're going to make sure that the public hears what the police is doing, and that the press has an opportunity to ask our police commissioner and our leaders what needs to be done. This is not the only plan that our campaign has unveiled. We've unveiled plans on cutting property taxes, legalizing marijuana, requiring city leaders to release their tax returns, as I have, keeping Preakness, cracking down on e-cigarettes, revitalizing the arts, supporting the LGBTQ community, ensuring water equity, launching aerial surveillance, diverting low-level offenders to workforce development, and fostering startups and small businesses. Those two are part of the blueprint for how to create a better Baltimore. But none of that can happen. None of it will matter if the next 5 years look like the 5 years after 1994. May we all pray, may we all hope, may we all work to make sure that is not the case. But let us not just pray and hope. Let us make sure we come together around plans and ideas to take it forward. Thank you so much for being here. I know a few folks need to go, but otherwise I want to open it up to some questions.
Drew, I have a question.
Yeah.
The majority of shootings this year have involved illegally carrying handguns. How does your plan directly address getting those off the streets and out of the hands of violent abusers?
Yeah. You know, so many of the gun cases that we prosecuted was not somebody who had no record but didn't have a permit and that's why it was illegal. So many of the cases that we prosecuted were people with a record that shouldn't have had a gun in the first place. Those felon in possession cases have to be prosecuted and taken as seriously as a shooting or a homicide, because that gun is a gun waiting to be used in a shooting or a homicide. One of the things that we've pledged to do is to subject every felon in possession case in Baltimore City to automatic federal review. When I was a first-year prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office, many of the cases that I prosecuted were felon in possession cases where the gun had been used in a shooting, where the gun had been used in a murder. We prosecuted them at the federal level for holding a gun when they were not allowed to because of a prior conviction, but we were prosecuting at the federal level because that gun had been used in a shooting or a homicide that needed to be prosecuted at the state level. We didn't have federal jurisdiction over the murder or the shooting, but we did have jurisdiction over the gun case.
But in some of those cases, the feds may not pick up the prosecution, and it's going to be kicked back down to the local office of the state's attorney, and they have the discretion of whether to prosecute those cases or not. How do you address that?
One of the things that we have to do is to make sure that there is greater transparency about the fate of these cases. Too many cases, not just gun cases, are being dropped. A few years ago, I looked at 2,500 gun cases that have been charged in Baltimore City. Cases, everything from felon in possession all the way up to a murder using a gun case. We found that over a third of them had been dropped on average 6 months after the indictment. We found that the overwhelming majority of the remaining ones were pled out to virtually no sentence, just time served, and that the ones that went to trial, 2/3 of the ones that went to trial were resulting in an acquittal on all counts. We all have to do better. We have to make sure the public is able to monitor those cases. We have encouraged the creation of a dedicated gun court where we can keep close track of those gun prosecutions and be sure we know why those cases are being dropped and why those prosecutions are not resulting in the kinds of outcomes that we believe we deserve. But we also have to create better cases. We have to make sure that our detectives are going out there and collecting the evidence, working with prosecutors to make sure that not just the state's attorney's office, but the attorney general's office as well as the U.S. attorney's office has the evidence they need to obtain a successful conviction at trial. Do you have any other questions? Talia? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being on the spot, man. Did I do all right?
Did great, as you always do.
I felt I was a little off. Some days I feel like I'm dynamite.